Welcome everyone to the international mentoring community via mentorpractices.com. Today, Doug and I are going to share with you what we call the I believe, I suppose statements, ideas, insights. And what we're doing is, in a way, answering questions that others have of us around what we believe is to be true and useful. And then ask ourselves, I suppose that means, and that way extend and expand that I believe statement. We thought that this would be a really great way to capture some frequently asked questions in a format that might be a little bit different than the dry, well, here's the answer to the question. We thought what we do is just share it via the video. And what we're going to do is set these up, and over time we'll keep adding, whether you ask us questions or we find ways in which to create our own I believe, I suppose statement. So let's get started.
Stephen, why don't you share with us an I believe, I suppose statement that you've created?
One of the questions that has come to us is around mentoring and educating approaches. And my I believe is that I believe mentoring is one of 12 approaches. I've written about them, and I've written about the first 9. I've added 3 more now, and with a slight edit to one of the first 9, and those are coming out in book form. But to give you a sense of these 12, mentoring is one of those that is under the sort of banner of guide on the ride. And the other 2 categories are teach in the reach and sage off the page. So I'm not going to get into all the other ones, but I just wanted to bring to the foreground because we are sharing about mentoring. And I believe it's an important one because certainly it's one that came about because of a lot of my own studies in adult education and human performance improvement. And it was one that sort of was a counterpoint to this notion of coaching. Unfortunately, sometimes mentoring sort of feels like the distant cousin of coaching, but I believe it has its own merits. And when we get a chance to really bring it forward, it has a lot of contribution. Now, the other aspect of this, I really learned mentoring while engaged in outdoor programs, because there was a lot of conversations that were being had and people were asking me questions, and I developed this mentoring approach in the outdoors, and it worked a real treat for me. And so the I suppose that goes here with it is that sometimes when you sort of draw out mentoring out of a whole bunch of educating approaches, people might say, well, aren't they all the same and just slight little variations and all that? And I have to come back and say, I want to be crystal clear here. It is a way of educating, of which there are many. I speak about the 12. So I suppose that what happens is that people miss this adage. When you mentor your mentor, and when you're clear about that, then the extension, what I believe the importance of mentoring really comes to the foreground, because one of the things is don't switch up if you're mentoring and move into coaching or instructing or training without at least acknowledging it. That's what I suppose is going to happen here. And people just slip into the other ones when there needs to be a really reasoned explanation so that the person really gets the sense of it, right? And therefore, you are really informing the mentee. The mentee is then clear that you have shifted, right? So if you're going to go into coach, then the person might be a coachee. Or if you slipped into instructor, they became an instructee, right? I'm playing with words now, okay? But really what I'm trying to get at is this clarity from consistency. I suppose that if mentoring is what you're going to do, you are going to mentor, and being one of the 12 educating approaches, which is what I believe, then truly mentor. I believe that it's so important that the mentor uses the mentee's first name upon greeting. And I say this is because I have even slipped up on this, is that sometimes I forget how important it is to say that first name, to be able to bring it out into the conversation as quickly as possible, because it comes from a place of the ethic of hospitality. And often what takes place is we sort of forget some of that, and we just sort of slip into having a conversation because maybe, oh, well, we've emailed each other, or maybe we phoned each other, maybe we've had a Zoom call or whatever. But every time that I meet at the very beginning, I want to make sure that I use the mentee's first name. I believe that that is truly important. And if you're meeting face to face, even things like the old fist bump, sort of replacing the handshake nowadays, right? These are the kind of gestures that sort of forms up a bit of a ritual that is sort of is a way in which to just sort of bring this arrangement and connection into a stronger bond than just sort of slipping in, making it feel kind of mechanical. Actually find a way in which to bring this hospitality and this sort of organic connection, and even the simple smile that goes with that. I remember one time I was at a coffee shop and the mentee came in and we sort of jumped right into it right away, and I sort of have to shake my head and go, hang on a minute, Bert. I didn't even greet you. I didn't even say hello, and we're into it. And he said, you know what, I appreciate that. And from then on in, it made a lot more sense to us as we went forward. So I suppose there's an element of weirdness here, because maybe after the first meeting, you might go, well, do we really need to do it? And I would go, okay, well, figure that out as you interact with your mentee, right? Because, you know, speaking the first name is something that sort of people sort of attune to and go, oh, yeah, I'm here, I'm present, you're present. And if the mentee acknowledges it back, that's great, okay? And what happens here, okay, is if the mentee takes up the same approach, so that you as a mentor, eventually, you're not the one who's doing the first greeting, the mentee is doing the first greeting, until you can weave it to a point that it's natural, whoever does it, okay? Because sometimes as a mentor, you've got to set up some of these, what I call rituals, just to get things going, to sort of land things with the mentee, because sometimes the mentee doesn't know what it means to be in a mentoring arrangement connection. And I do this because I suppose what's important here is that you contribute from confidence. And if I, as the mentor, am confident in what I do, then my contribution flows from things like the use of the first name, whether it's in person, the fist bumps, the smiles, even doing it somehow, even on Zoom and Google Meets, whatever way in which you do it, finding that way in which to greet each other. I think that is so important to bring hospitality into this mentoring arrangement and connection. This one actually links back to International Mentoring Community, the word community. I believe mentoring is best offered in community. And I say that is mentoring framed by community, because mentoring is like a movement. Now, in organizations, it makes sense, but if you're even doing youth mentoring, there is a community aspect that is there with the school, for example. There's also, if you're in the mental health area, there is community there, of which mentoring is a way to support what's taking place, to encourage the conversations. And what it does is it encourages the sort of learning, knowing, doing conversations. It's collaborative. And those words that I'm sharing there has a sense of community. Community being common unity, that's how you spell it. In other words, what unifies us is what's common. And therefore, the conversations you're having, the community in which you're actually working with, is what shares it and sets it up. Now, I suppose there's something here that I think needs to be clarified. And this has taken me a little bit of time over the years because of all the different kind of work I've done and the mentoring that I have done. so that we set up mentoring to be useful, helpful, and eventful. And that's to take a look at the sense of the lenses of community. Now, one of the first lenses is obviously community, that level of commonness that unifies us together. That's key. And sometimes we've just got to learn about how to move into that. But then I think there's this community of concepts. Sometimes people gather in associations and they're just looking at the concepts of whatever we're looking at. So from the international mentoring community point of view, let me just use the community of concepts about mentoring, just sharing what's the knowledge that's necessary, the aspects of attitude. And what that does is takes us into a community of importance, because out of all of those concepts, what's important? And what's important is usually sort of an outside in referencing. So if I'm going to do mentoring of these concepts, which ones are important for where I am at this point in time? All right. Then that takes us into what I call a community of practice. And this is where you start to go, okay, if the knowledge and attitude I have, what are the skills that go with that? So international mentoring community point of view, community, whatever you're thinking about, it's this notion of the practice, putting it into the doing, into the application. And I remember this term because it was one of those terms that started to unfold in the world of organizations, learning organizations, creating community of practice. So there was a connection there years ago that I made. And what that did in my workplace experience, which I then brought into this notion of mentoring as a whole for the international mentoring community, it's the community of significance. And significance is, how does it play itself out so that it has this deeper, richer meaning to create deeper, richer experiences that expands and extends mentoring and the community in which this takes place. And it requires quite a bit of reflection, and it requires a lot of communication. Now, one of the great things about the word communication is it starts off with communi, and if you move the C to the other side of A, right, you get the word action. If we come back to community, it's another way of saying community. So level of commonness. So therefore, the notion of communication is what's the level of commonness that guides us in action. Well, mentoring is really communication. It guides us in action. It's this notion of community that I've been sharing about. So I suppose from that perspective, it's so important for us to understand that mentoring is best offered in community. And what that does for me, and I share it with all of you, is that it's about communicate from community. That's what it sets up. That's sort of that big benefit that arrives for us. I suppose insights that we're sharing with you that are in this video, one of the things I want to remind dear mentors is that if you can think through this format, it is actually a great way to be able to bring the insights, the ideas, the interpretations, the investigations, the inquiries with the mentee. And more so is if you can get the mentee to start working with this, I believe, I suppose, then it opens up that deeper, richer communication between you that gives you that collaborative conversations that extends and expands the mentoring arrangement and connection. So I would encourage you to find ways in which to bring this or something similar into your conversations. So with that, we'll be doing more of these. If you have questions that we can frame up as I believe, I suppose, we'll be certain to shoot a video and bring it forward. Again, these are being used for frequently asked questions and sometimes to be put around the website in sporadic areas. So with that, take care.